Hi everyone. Today I want to talk to you about different potting soils and how they hold moisture. I found some pretty interesting results and I think it might help you choose the types of potting media that you use for your bonsai and for other plants. So what started all of this is the problem I have where every summer I go on vacation for a few weeks and it doesn't matter who I ask to water the plants. When I come back, there's always some plants that didn't get enough water and they either die or the leaves have dried up to the point where they just really need intensive care to recover. So this year I set up a sprinkler system on an automatic timer set to water the plants every 3 days. I was pretty happy with the way the system worked, and for the most part, all my plants survived my vacation. So I thought, hey, this is great. I'll just leave this automatic timer running all summer and I won't have to go out there and water plants at all. And that worked great until the end of summer and the temperature started dropping. And now the plants were getting overwatered and I started having all kinds of problems. The leaves were spotting brown and falling off, and some of them even looked like they were dying, and I was starting to get powdery mildew. So by the time I realized that that was the problem, the damage had already been done. So obviously not great, and it made me start thinking about how to really control the water that each plant gets, and if there was anything else I could do about that to make the situation better for my Japanese maples. Now, some of you may keep houseplants, and I have a few houseplants, and I am just terrible at keeping them alive. So if you're like me, you're not great at keeping up on your houseplants, but it's not like I completely disregard them. You know, I get my watering can out every once in a while and water them, and so it seems like there's no reason why they should be dying. What I finally figured out is that at some point I realized that I had let the soil dry out and that no matter how much I water the plants after that, the water just runs over the surface and then down the sides in between the pot and the dried soil. And the potting medium never gets moist. So as far as the plant's concerned, it's not getting any water and I'm not doing anything for my plants. And a great example of this is a Monstera plant that I have. No matter how much I watered it, it just looked like it was wilting and it was on its last legs. And so what I did, it's too cold now to take it outside and I didn't want to shock it. So I took it to the shower and I took my shower head and just soaked it down, and then came back another half hour later and then soaked it down again. So that sat there for a while and then put it back out. And it was amazing that within a day and a half, 2 days, it looks like a plant that you just picked up out of the nursery. And so it just made me think that being able to get the water into the potting mixture is really important. And if it does retain moisture in the summertime, during the fall I can't keep watering it, or if it rains, that I need to be able to shed that moisture and keep enough aeration that I don't suffocate the roots of the plants. So let's take a look at my soil experiment. I took a number of commonly used types of potting media and put them into 2-inch pots, and then I watered them down and weighed them to see how much moisture was absorbed by the material and then how much moisture was lost over a period of 2 weeks. So here are the potting media that I used during my little test. So across the top here I have akadama, pumice, black lava rock, sphagnum moss, and the mixture that I use for my Japanese maples, 3 parts pine bark pieces, 3 parts Miracle-Gro, and 1 part Perlite. And in the second row I have Miracle-Gro potting soil, Perlite, pine bark fines, sphagnum peat moss, and sifted pine bark pieces. Here's a time lapse of me filling up the pots. So for my measurements, I used a portable postal scale, and I did my measurements in grams because it's a smaller unit, and so I thought I could get a little bit better resolution, but I did convert to a couple of different measurements, ounces and tablespoons, that you'll see in my charts. I measured the weights of the dry medium by weighing the pots and then subtracting the weight of just the pot by itself. And you'll see the weights in this chart here. It's pretty much exactly what you would expect. The black lava rock and akadama were the heaviest materials, and the lightest were the peat moss, the perlite, and the sphagnum moss, mainly because of so much air volume in the sphagnum moss. So after filling up each of the pots with the potting media, I watered them down a couple of times to make sure they were thoroughly wet, and then let them stand for about 15 minutes. And then took the starting weights to be able to calculate the amount of water that was being held by each type of soil. So while I was watering in the potting media, I did find that the peat moss didn't absorb water at all, just poured it onto the top and it just sat there. And when I dug around in it, I found that it wasn't penetrating the top layer. So what I had to do was dump it all out into a pan and water that, and really work the water into it with my hand until it was completely saturated, and then I put it back into the pot. So now I'm thinking, if the potting mix that I'm using has peat moss in it, and that potting mix is allowed to dry out completely, like say when I don't water my indoor house plants, when I try and water them afterwards, none of the water is going to be absorbed. It's just going to run over the top, down the sides, and out the bottom of the pot. And I think that's exactly what happens with my houseplants. And what do you think is in most of the indoor houseplant potting mixes? Well, peat moss. And it's also what's in Miracle-Gro. It's great if it's moist, and it does hold a lot of moisture, but as soon as it dries out, it's very difficult for that moisture to get back in there again unless it's completely saturated. And you won't get that by just casual watering. So I weighed each container twice a day for 2 weeks. Okay, so here are the results. I'm not going to make too many comments about these. I'll just let you look at these charts and interpret them for yourselves, because I'm afraid of making any comments that are going to offend people. But there's definitely some trends, and you can see what they are. And for the popular types of bonsai potting mix, you can see how those behave. Well, that's all I have for this week. I hope you found my little experiment interesting, and that you learned something about moisture retention of these commonly used potting materials. So I just want to leave you with this as a reminder: don't let your houseplants dry out unless you feel inclined to take a shower with them. All right, have a good week. Bye.